the best laid plans don't always go according to plan, and there was going to be plenty of time for discussion after the 5 presentations, or 6 presentations, if you count mine. We are just about into the coffee break, but I would like to leave some space for questions and comments. So if you'd like to make a comment or question, would you like to make that clear and say who you are first? Yeah. Yeah, Heather.
Heather Self of Prince of Masons. I spoke at this conference 4 years ago on BEPS in Africa. And one of the comments that I made then, I'd like to come back to, the suggestion that could the OECD, on a multilateral basis, encourage or provide in some sort of multilateral instrument a sort of safe harbour net for poorer countries in allowing them to have, say, a de minimis level of withholding tax. Do you think that suggestion has any merit? Do you think the progress that has since been made on the MLI makes that more likely?
I'll hold that and get some more in if there are other questions. There must be, presumably, oh, by the way, there's a microphone coming around, which I didn't mention before. Steve.
Giorgia, I'm just wondering why...
Sorry, this is Steve.
Oh, Steve Shea. I'm not sure what my affiliation is these days. So I was just going to ask Giorgia why there seemed to be there were somewhere in the mid-30s of companies that favored some kind of advanced cooperative tax arrangement. I'm wondering, that struck me as a bit low. Since it's an easy answer to just check yes on, why do you think over two-thirds check no?
Okay, anything else? Yeah, there's a question here.
Thank you. My question maybe goes to Ms.
Could you just say who you are, please?
My name is Putu Sudiana from Indonesia. Now I'm studying in Newcastle University. Okay. Based on your presentation, I think thank you very much for your concern on lower income countries. It seems like a paradox in lower income countries. They rely very much on income tax, but they have problem on managing and also under pressure by giving some incentive for investors, something like that. In my opinion, is it possible for, I don't know whether it's OECD or IMF to raise some issue that the lower income countries need to make a multilateral agreement, not to do aggressive tax incentive to avoid racing to the bottom, because I am afraid that we will end up with winner's curse. No one will get benefit from the racing. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, one question here. Dorota?
It's Yavuz Sönmez from Queen Mary University of London. I'm doing PhD in there. And my question is to Professor Baker. And in the part of why has the Commission done this, do you agree with the idea that they done it to take the tax competition under control? Because there is in theory says that they done it because they want to regulate the tax competition, but they can't get in the direct taxation in European Union. And related to that, are you thinking that there will be state aid investigation related to patent boxes in member states? Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to follow up with a question on state aid as well to Philip and possibly Dan, which is an economic question. So I think of state aid as being it's the protection of competition in the market. We don't want to give an advantage to company A over company B. Suppose it's the case that even under all the existing rules, the existing tax system does favour multinational companies over domestic companies. It may be that you're quite right in saying that this is perfectly legitimate under existing rules, but if that's the outcome, isn't that something that the European Commission should point out and do something about? So, okay, so I'm going to pass those questions around to Can we have brief answers, please?
Yes.
Vicky
very.
first. You have 2 questions.
I think I do have 2 questions. First, Heather's question, is there merit in a multilateral approach to let low-income countries have a minimum withholding floor? In virtue of a brief answer, yes. Likely, maybe not, but yes. And then the question from the gentleman from Indonesia, very, very much there's merit in trying to generate mutual approaches to avoid the race to the bottom. Absolutely, that's the only thing that's probably going to work, I would say, and there's been a huge amount of discussion of this, and in fact, in 2 weeks, your government is sponsoring a regional conference for the ASEAN countries and ministers, and a great deal of the discussion will probably be about this very thing, but it hasn't worked yet.
Mike, can I just add one word on the developing countries to Heather, who we're friends on Twitter, and I loved all your dog posts, by the way. Just 2 things. I think the inclusive framework, which has just begun, and then the platform for tax collaboration that the other international organizations are working on, is really a new start. And I think that it's potentially a more productive place for this work than has been the UN, frankly. So let's keep our fingers crossed and see that there can be time and energy put into those issues, and maybe you wind up somewhere where you suggest.
Okay, thanks. Giorgia.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. On the safe harbors and the question whether they could be helpful for developing countries, again, it's something that we are aware of. And our inclusive framework, as Bob has said, will probably look into that. The inclusive framework now has 100 countries, and many developing countries are part of the steering group of the inclusive framework. So their opinion will count. Okay. On Steve's question on the percentages of who likes multilateral cooperative compliance programs and APAs. So I've been a bit tough on myself because I've reported you only the percentage of those who say that these instruments could be very helpful or extremely helpful. If I were to report you the percentage of the respondents who say they are helpful, very helpful, and extremely helpful, we would get to 80%. Okay? In terms of respondents who like this type of instrument. Having said that, I think that the percentage is a bit below than what we expected because it's a very new instrument. So you might tend to say, yes, it's an important instrument, but since I don't know how it's going to work, I won't say it's going to be extremely important. What we find when we speak to business is that they think it's a very promising way going forward. Okay, so we are quite positive about that. And our pilot project it's a pilot project in the sense that it will touch on what the issues around that and the advantages are.
And if I can just add 2 quick words against that. The 2 other issues are cost. Countries are really worried about the cost. And secondly, the idea that tax administrations and taxpayers trust each other sufficiently around the world is really varies greatly, and I think influences that debate as well.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Philip?
Okay, on state aid, the gentleman from Queen Mary asked, why has the Commission done it? Is it to take tax competition under control? Almost certainly yes, but the reason that tax competition arises is because the treaties preserve national sovereignty over direct taxation. And it makes exactly my point that the Commission is using a tool that was not designed for these purposes, state aid, to try and get around a restriction that comes from the treaties themselves. It is a giant grasp of jurisdiction by DG competition over the tax field, which they don't have under the treaties. There. You also asked specifically about patent boxes and whether the Commission will bring action against patent boxes. I think that must be very unlikely now. There was some discussion earlier on about patent boxes and whether they constitute state aid, but once in the course of BEPS, the UK and Germany did their deal over sort of acceptable patent boxes. You can bring state aid against Luxembourg. You can bring state aid against Ireland. You can bring state aid probably against Netherlands. They're quite small, but you don't bring a state aid case against Germany. Yeah, you probably do, but not in an area like this. So I don't think that's particularly likely now. Mike's question, you asked me an economics question, and that is, if the tax system favours multinationals over standalone companies, isn't that a bad thing? Can I give you an economics answer? I'd always assumed that economics favoured multinationals over standalone companies. The multinationals, by their size and by the theory of the firm, have advantages and are able, through synergies, to make profits that are not available to standalone one-country firms. And to try to correct that, it's like comparing apples and oranges. If you try to say that the same amount of tax on the profits should be paid by a standalone as a multinational, you're not really comparing comparable situations. There, transfer pricing, which is the issue in Fiat, Starbucks, is only concerned with associated enterprises operating cross-jurisdiction. To compare those with a standalone operating in one country is literally to compare chalk and cheese, and that of itself is a novel idea.
I think I have to disagree with, let's have some lawyers debate economics, so I'm going to have to disagree with Philip about that, because if multinationals have non-tax advantages from economic synergies, that's great. But it's not desirable from an efficiency standpoint, certainly from a global efficiency standpoint, for there to be tax synergies, where one reason, for example, you could have a case where a standalone domestic company is more profitable before merger, but it's, except for the tax point that once it's merged, it's acquired by a foreign multinational, it can now shift more profits out. So I think it's clearly tax synergies. The fact that multinationals have the ability to pay less tax are not global efficiency promoting, although it's a separate question whether any one country or even one region can benefit from unilaterally fighting that. So I think it's quite clear to me that the question of multinationals paying less tax than domestic standalones due to tax synergies, tax planning advantages, is a legitimate concern. It's something that the EU should look at. I won't say the EC, because obviously that gets into legal and jurisdictional aspects of EU law that, again, I'm not an expert in. But I think it's clear. One thing that's made me sympathetic to the EC from the start on this is that they're clearly looking at something that is a legitimate policy concern, whatever the right answer ultimately proves to be.
Okay, I'd like to thank all the 5 speakers for excellent presentations and discussion. And although I think we have plenty of material to carry on for a long time, it's actually coffee break, so we're going to stop there and come back in a few minutes.